Okay, so have you ever needed to write something, but you didn't want to turn your back to the audience? Well, we've got a solution for you today that is fairly unique. I don't think I've seen it before. It's something I just came up with recently. And I think it would be really useful for any live streams, Zoom calls, you name it. And it's this notion of a light pen. And you can actually see the result right here. You'll see that this light pen is not like it, you can see through it. So it's semi transparent. So it's kind of like a layer that is in front of you. And so I'm going to show you how to do this particular light tutorial. But before we begin, I'll let you know that my name is Dr. Ed, and I'm just a geek dad who is obsessed about the future. And I've been thinking about this for some time. And the reason I've been thinking about light pens is because of the early work of Clearboard by Ishii et al., Hiroshi Ishii from MIT. This is kind of like a key research work that has inspired many researchers for decades. And we've been trying to say, like, oh, this is like the ideal like video conferencing setup. And so I thought to begin with, maybe we should look at Clearboard, learn a little bit about the history of this, and then I'll dive into what my reflections were about Clearboard from many years ago. Okay, so if we're ready, here we go. Oh, and before we, of course, if this is something that you found very helpful, would be great if you would say like hi or comment or give us a like or even subscribe. You'll learn a lot more. And if you want to learn a little bit more about our site, you can visit aiparenting.live. And so that's where we're located. You can sign up for the email list where we'll be doing a little bit more tutorials on just different aspects of video. And so this is just one of a few that is focused on some of the new things that you can do with virtual production. People are going to move beyond their cameras. You can already see people with snap cameras on their webcams, but there's a lot more that you can do than snap cameras. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what can be done. And today's tutorial, all you need really is just an iPad, and you should be able to access it. And so, yeah, here we go. So what I'll do to begin with is just start off with a brief video. So I'll take this and I'll erase what I had here. All right, so let's go into the video.
Users had no trouble in distinguishing drawing marks from the video background. The transparent glass window metaphor seems to make users sensitive to the distance between the drawing and the partner. The most novel feature of Clearboard, and the most important, is that it provides precise gaze awareness, or gaze tracking. A Clearboard user can easily recognize what the partner is gazing at on the screen during a conversation. Precise gaze awareness cannot be easily achieved in an ordinary meeting environment using a whiteboard, because both users stand on the same side of the board. To understand the implication of gaze awareness, we conduct crossing video cameras located just above the screen. The two bottom images, B and D, top left side of the river the partner was gazing at, and this information was quite useful in passing advice to each other. The importance of eye contact in the design of face-to-face concept.
So I think you can get a little bit of the concept from the video that I just showed. This was a seminal work. It's often referred to in many academic research papers. And this is kind of where my background and expertise comes from. And so I've always been inspired to think about, well, what could I do to do that? And so the method that I'm using to achieve the light pen is with an iPad. And I'm sending it in as an input. And I'm drawing on top using an iPad app. And so what that does is it allows me to create a light pen. So maybe I'll just write the word light pen again. Light pen. Okay, so when you see this, this particular drawing that I have on top is transparent. Like you can see through it a little bit. It's like little bit translucent. And the whole point of this, like when you're looking for a type of annotation, I feel that there's a few things that I reflected on this. So the things that were really important in the annotation, I would say are the, I want to say context. I also want to say yeah, so context. Context is important. You want to be able to not block everything that is on the screen. Maybe you've got something important that you want to show, or maybe you want to do a hand gesture or something on top. You still want to be able to see that. So that context is one of the things that I found that is very important. The second thing that you really want in it is the body. I want to call it like the embodiment. So you want it to be like a face to face, or maybe a better way of describing that is like yeah. Like you want, oh, what did he call it? He called it gaze, right? You want to gaze into your audience. You want to be able to look them directly in the eye. And I think that that's really valuable as well. So you want to not have to turn your back in order to write somewhere, in order to focus on your audience. And then the last one, which I think is kind of focused more on the attention, but I think that that's still a really important, still a really important aspect. So like getting their attention, being able to like draw a line or draw an arrow is very valuable. And so that's something that you want to be able to, oops, you want to be able to get to very quickly. And so the other aspect was, so when you're doing the gaze aspect, like you may want to have like hand gestures and stuff. One way that you could do that is just by drawing directly, and then people could see you. Like, for example, if I was writing it directly, there was like a surface here, or if I could get the camera on the iPad running directly, that would allow me to write. But I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to do it. I think for gestures, you may want something that is uh, separate from your drawing, because your drawing is kind of like it's just there for like writing some context. And so it's not as important as the gestures that you may be doing, which kind of express something. So it separates the two. So I argue that this is kind of like potentially a better method of doing that. Okay, so how does this work? So let's go into this method. So I won't go into all of the technical details, but I will show you kind of the main setup, the main architecture of how everything works. So let's start at the top. So let's imagine you have your camera view here. So the camera is what is looking at the screen right now. At the very bottom of the screen, what we have is a green screen. So this is the green screen behind me, showing the Tony Stark building, because like to me, this reminds me of Tony Stark and some of the things that he did in the Iron Man movies, where you could see these translucent holograms. I think that's really what we're trying to get at. And why are holograms so popular in Hollywood? I think part of the reason is they allow you to see other people through them. They allow you to maintain that context. So on top of the hologram, I would suggest that you also want to have a person, right? So this is the actor on top. And so the actor, in this case, it's me, right in front of the green screen. So I'm the actor who is acting on top. So you can see like I'm just a part of this layer. And that's the thing about video is not just like a single image, like it's just your camera. Think of it as like many different layers that you can add on top. And so that's something I'm going to teach more of. Is just these different layers that are on there. And then the last is going to be your annotations. And so here I want to show like there's a few different annotations that are on top, little drawings. And that's what we're adding today. So the focus of today isn't on the green screen. There's a lot of tutorials already out there on how to do a green screen, but it's on these annotations. So how do we get these annotations? And of course, if you guys have any questions while I'm answering these, you feel free to post them inside the chat. I'm happy to answer them anytime. And I'm also watching the Amazon as well. So essentially, there's two different aspects. So there's like a hardware that is required, and then there's some software that is required. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like what are the hardware that you're going to need, and then what is the software that you're going to need. So I hope that makes sense. And if you want, you can join me in trying this. So let's talk about a little bit about the hardware. Okay. So really, of course, you need to have some type of camera, right? And so there is a camera requirement, right? You need some type of like, ideally, it would be like kind of the laptop camera would be sufficient. When it comes to gaze awareness, there's different ways to do it, but the way that I've seen has been like you can take a display like this, and somebody puts like a camera right in the middle of this. I think it was Akimoto. No, that's not true. It was another Japanese researcher whose name is escaping me right now. Um, his work put like a camera right in the middle, and if you looked at Hiroshi Ishii's clearboard, like they had a like a display, but they had like a camera that was like looking directly into this display, so you always had the eye gaze. And I feel that more and more like that's really important, and we don't really accommodate for it. You're always like looking slightly off, and that's not ideal. You want to be looking like straight at the camera, and that's something I have a setup for here. And so that's the camera aspect. There is, oops, maybe, okay. The other aspect is you need some kind of device for writing. And so I'm using an iPad and I'm using a pencil. You can use like a different tool if you want, but I found that the iPad works really well because it has a really great drawing surface. So those are the two aspects that I'm using, an iPad and a pencil. And then the last part that you need is the HDMI. So you need some kind of HDMI connector that is going to take your iPad input and it's going to send it to the computer. It could send it to some different software, and I'll talk about the software afterwards. And so to give you a little bit idea of my setup, I think you can see it already. So what you're seeing is the iPad is in front, right? It is on the top layer in front of my camera view. The green screen is behind me. So this is a totally separate view from what you're seeing. And so the HDMI is used to split the two. And so I have one, and how do you capture HDMI? So essentially you need two things. You need one is like a dongle. How to describe, and then maybe I should write down a capture card. So those are the five things that you need. You need a capture card as well. And so the first part is a little bit of a dongle. So something like that. I have like a USB-C to HDMI, like that kind of dongle works just fine. And then once you have that, you connect the iPad, and of course, like you're using the pencil on it to the dongle. Okay, and then once you have that, gives you an HDMI output, and you can connect the HDMI. Oops, I'll put it on the other side to something like this. This is an Elgato HD60 like capture card. You can buy these for like $100, maybe a little bit less, and that allows you to capture the input. I'm not sending it there. I'm actually sending it to my Blackmagic, and it's doing a lot of the green screen compositing for me in hardware. And that's another recommendation I have is as much as you can move something that is traditionally in software, you can move into hardware, the better. So that is something to definitely to consider. And once you have like these different pieces, so you've got like the input, then you need some software in order to connect all of to make the magic happen. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the magic next, but maybe I should explain how all of this connects first. So these two, let me undo that. I'm going to switch the color. So these two, the iPad and the pencil, essentially are the ones that are going to connect to your HDMI source. and then you have an HDMI dongle, and then that is going to be the one that connects to your capture card. Okay. And then the capture card is being sent into your Mac, wherever your camera is, right? Back into the camera. And so that is how that connection works. So you have the input from the iPad and the pencil being sent to your dongle, to your HDMI dongle, and then that is being sent to the whatever capture card you decide to use, and then that's essentially being sent up to the very top, which is the camera. So that gives you a sense of the hardware setup that is being used. Okay, so let me know if this is making sense so far. You can type something in the chat. Um, yeah. Um, so today we're learning about light pen, how to do a light pen, how to add a light pen. Oh, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this. I'm going to move on to the software side. So all of this is the hardware that's required. So hardware. Now I'm going to start erasing this and I'm going to move over to the software side. So on the software side, there's software that you need on the iPad. And so the software that you need on the iPad is you can use many different types of software. I prefer to use the Procreate is my favorite. And so Procreate is what I'm using for this. I've seen some tutorials online that recommend to use Notability or other software, but I found that Procreate has some of the best pens, like the colors for creating light pens. They have really great color and resolution, and they have texture, and they have a glow to them. So it really creates the light pen effect. So you can choose to use whatever software you prefer, but I do prefer Procreate. That would be the one that I recommend. And then once you have that software, of course, that's going to be connected to your PC. And now you need something to composite, like to put all of the different pieces together. And so typically, what I recommend is something like Open Broadcast Studio, OBS. Some of you probably already have this, uh, but Open Broadcast Studio is just a free software. You can download it online, and once you have the broadcast studio, it's pretty easy to create the different layers. And I can even show you a brief tutorial of how to do it. Essentially, you're adding media elements. Your camera is one media element. The HDMI feed from the say capture card, like the Elgato capture card, is another feed, and so you just say, I want to put one on top of the other. In terms of green screening, there are different ways that you can green screen. And that's where the technique really comes in. But I'll talk about that one afterwards. I want to make sure that I've covered the software basics that you need. And then the last part of software that you need is whatever streaming software you use. I use Restream. It's not the only software out there, but I found that Restream has worked really well for me to post onto many different platforms. So that's something that you can use as well as a tutorial. So so there's three different softwares. One's on the iPad. So let's show maybe the connections of how these connect. So Procreate and your camera are sending into Open Broadcast Studio. And Open Broadcast Studio is able to set up a virtual camera. So it's able to say, hey, I'm a camera to any software. So it could be Zoom, it could be Teams, it could be whatever you want. It could be, I use Restream. So you could send it to Restream, and then that goes to a bunch of different platforms as a virtual camera. And so I found that works well. If you want, like, it's possible to replace Open Broadcast Studio with something like so in my case, I'm not using Open Broadcast Studio. I'm using like just like hardware. So I'm using the ATEM Mini Pro by Blackmagic. And so Procreate is sending into the ATEM. and then ATEM is doing the combining, like the green screening for me. So there's different ways that you can do that as well. But I found that this particular method seems to work best for me. And to talk a little bit about Procreate, like this software is incredible. They have, yes, they have like different gestures that you can configure. Like for example, one is just zooming in. So if I like found this is too small and I really want to make it bigger, I can zoom in really clearly. And if you look at the ink on it, you can see like the actual ink itself has like that texture to it. You can see that there's a little bit of a glow around it, and this is something that I've been wanting to achieve is this kind of glow effect. And so that's something that I found um, a lot of other software, like they won't give you this glow. Like you will just see green, for example, or you just see like a hard line. And I didn't want a hard line. I wanted something that felt like it was this hologram on top. And so that was an example. And of course, when you have the ability to zoom in, I'm just using two fingers. That means I can, if it's kind of in my way or if it's too big, I can just like make it a little bit smaller and just put it off to the side. So that's an example of what I've used. And then I've also set it up so that like one finger is used to erase, and so I can erase the all the content fairly easily. Okay, so I hope that makes sense so far. I'm going to give you another opportunity. If you want, you can ask your questions. I want to thank those joining me on Facebook, on Twitch. Um, you know, say hi. Let me know how you doing. Let me know what you're curious about. So I talked about hardware, and I also talked about the software that you're going to need. The next is I'm going to talk a little bit about the method that you achieve all of this, put it all together. And in order to understand this, you need to understand a little bit about how green screen works, or the methods by which you can key stuff out. And so there are different types of, so I'm going to call this like ways of removing backgrounds, because that's really what this is all about. All this is trying to do is trying to separate the person, myself, from the background, right? So there's a green screen behind me. We're trying to separate the two. How do we achieve that? There is some ink that I'm drawing with the pen. I'm trying to separate that from the rest of the background. So there's different ways that you can do it. They have different names, and that's what I'm going to cover today. So there's different methods that you can achieve this. I have seen some people who use, like for example, in some tutorials using Notability, what they use is a green screen and they chroma key it out. So this method, the first method that I'll cover is just called chroma. And all that means is that things that are a certain color, you're going to remove. So it's going to become transparent. So for example, a green chroma key means that anything that is green in this scene, take it out, that like it doesn't need to be in there. So it's looking for a green pixel inside your drawing. Or in some cases, like people don't use a green screen, they use a blue screen as well. So there's different colors, so that maybe they're using a blue screen in order to achieve that chroma effect. And anything that is blue gets removed. So those are different ways of achieving a chroma key. So that removes the background. So you could imagine you draw, instead of drawing on a white background, you can draw onto a black background. Now, my recommendation is that these two methods do not work well. They abandon them. Do not use them if you are going to be using you're trying to get a glow effect. And the reason for this type of method not working well is that it creates a hard edge, right? And the hard edge is going to look terrible, and it's not going to have the kind of glow effect that you want. And so the way that I would recommend is something called a luma key. So anything that is bright is kind of the method that I use. So Luma, uh, or we have a pre-multiply key. So PMK, which stands for oops, multiplied key. Okay, so that's another method. I don't know if it's kind of the ideal, but essentially once you have a Luma or pre-multiply key, everything is black by default. Your screen looks black. And anything that is higher than pure black then becomes something that appears on the screen. And so I think that that's really cool because then it allows you to have a little bit more of a glow effect and you can experiment with different types of opacity for your pens in order to achieve the same effect. And so, for example, let me draw this out. So I'm going to keep, I don't need any of this stuff. Maybe I'll switch to white. So the way that this works is you've got a black background, let's say. So at the very bottom, it's a pure black background is what I'm using inside Procreate. So I'm using a pure black background. If you have any color on top of it, so let's say I have some drawings on top of it, then those are brighter than the black background. And so those are allowed to go through. But you can set how much brighter and how much black is in it. And it is that Luma key, so when you're using the Luma method, that determines how transparent it is. And so I've done some experiments of different types of transparency levels for the different colors. And I have found that generally, you don't want 100% opaque. You want less than 100% opaque. And so if you want to know the methods that I'm using, let me see what I can show you here. So I'm using let me see, how do I see this? Oh yeah, it's called Light Brush. So there's actually, it's called Light Brush. Light Brush on Procreate. And I'm setting the transparency not to 100%, but I think I'm just setting it to 50%. And so 50% transparency on, this is too much. So like a 50% transparent is enough for me to achieve the effect that at least you can see through it. And then if it gets a little bit brighter, like it still has the color in there. And so, and if I push really hard, like depending on the weight of it, I can create more emphasis or less emphasis depending on that. So like 50% has been the amount that has worked for me. And then for size, you can adjust the size to what you feel like fits best. For me, I found that I'm using about 30, is it 35? Yeah, like 37% is the size that I found that seems to work well for me. But like I said, since you can zoom this in and you can make it bigger, it's not really like the size doesn't really matter. You can easily change it. And so I hope that gives you a sense. So black background, I'm drawing ink, but the ink, I don't want 100% opaque. I want it to be semi-transparent because I want to be able to, like if I do a gesture or something on top, I want to be able to see through it. I don't want to miss any of that content. And so one of the things that I really like about this method is it allows you to draw attention without losing the context in the video. So for example, if I'm switching over to here and I want to say like, oh, this is really important, and I want you to take a look at this, you can still like play the video. And you can still see through the ink that I had drawn. very easily.
This video
And so I
clip
can say,
shows a
this is
typical
the
example of
annotation
casual
that
clearboard
I
use.
want drawn.
The users are
That's
playing
fairly easy,
tic-tac-toe.
without
We noticed a
taking
common
too much of the
misconception
time.
during this
So it allows
casual
me to
session.
lightly
Users
draw
would
attention to
directly
something,
draw on their
and it
partner's
creates
image,
like a very
playfully
unique,
adding
type of
eyeglasses
I
or a
don't think anybody-
mustache, for
I haven't
example.
seen anything
They
like
clearly
this so
thought
far.
they had what
Even
you see
in
is what I
Ishi's
see.
original
They did
example,
not realize that although the drawing is shared, the facial images are not. Each person sees only the other's image. Thus,
sorry about that. So even in this example, they used actual ink on there. And one of the things that you have, like once the ink is drawn, it has to be a specific size. And so, it's there permanently. So if you want to erase it, it actually is kind of like a pain. And so they actually did several iterations on this. So erasing marks, they're saying like, of course, that's difficult. And so I thought it would be good for me to also talk about some of the limitations of this approach, because it's not all like it's not a perfect solution. It's kind of trying to make certain improvements. So there's advantages and disadvantages to this approach. On the plus side, some of the advantages of it is that it allows you to. It was the three things that I mentioned before. So if you missed it originally, it's you still maintain the context. You get to see the person's face, which is awesome. And then the last is you also get a little bit more of this kind of uniqueness, because I would say like it draws attention, because our eyes are naturally drawn to the brightest thing in the image. So if like this content is the stuff that is the brightest, you're going to be paying attention to it. So it does have some advantages, and it allows this separation between the gestures that you do with your hand and any writing gestures. So those two are separate, which I think is a really good advantage of it. But there are some disadvantages. So let's talk about the limitations. So what are the limits of this approach? So some of the limits of this approach is, I would say the biggest one is the iPad itself has a 4:3 aspect ratio. This is just how all iPads are. And whenever you share the screen, you have to use a 4:3 aspect ratio. So what that means is I cannot reach all the way to the very end of this display. In fact, the limit is right about here, right? So if you're trying to draw, like I cannot draw further than that. That is the maximum on this side that I can draw. And so there are some limitations. And of course, you can hide the user interface, but I like to have it on all the time. And so I actually crop the screen slightly so that I can see like the interface at all times, because I want to be able to see. So that means that I lose some space at the very top. So I can't draw like at the very top, and then some space at the very bottom. And then I actually move the control panel to this side, to the right side. So yeah, so there's some limitations as a result of that, right? By doing this type of crop. So that's obviously like kind of a clear, huge limitation. Another would be just the setup of it. I would say that the biggest limitation that I found for this is just like the setup. It takes time. And because you got to hook up a bunch of stuff, it potentially means that you're not going to use it all the time, because who has time to go and set stuff up every single day, or every single time that they want to have a meeting? It's kind of a pain in order to set up, because like you said, I have the iPad I got to bring. I've got to like plug in a bunch of stuff. I have to like have some configurations. You can save the configurations. That can save you time. You can save the Procreate files that have the ideal pens and everything on them. That's can save you time as well, but you still have to set it up. And so it is non-zero. And I remember the comment from John Carmack where he said, you know what, like some of the biggest limitations they've noticed for even using virtual reality was just having to, like, if you had a version where you would have to plug in your phone into the virtual reality set, that was enough of a barrier to prevent people from using it. So ease of use is extremely important. And unless you have something that is totally dedicated and you're never going to change it, then that's going to be an issue for you. So if you are like, hey, I need something that is like brain dead simple. I want it to work 100% of the time, and I'm not willing to have any like limitations on that. Then this is not the solution for you, right? So it really has a very specific aesthetic, and in order to achieve it, you need to use very specific means, and it does take some time and some patience in order to set up. So if you don't have patience, this is definitely not the approach for you. And then the last limitation I would say is the even the zoomability. Like I find that there are different setups that you can use for. So the last one I'll say is the zoom. So your ability to zoom in and zoom out. Procreate, at least the software that I'm using, isn't designed, and neither is Notability for infinite zoom. And so, if you really want to be able to like zoom in a lot and then zoom out, it's not really well designed for doing that. Because at the end of the day, this is a pixel image. So if I zoom in a lot, it becomes pixely and a little bit blurry. So you can see that, like you can see the individual pixels on it. And so this is not a vector graphic. So because of the non-vector graphic approach, there are some limitations on it. And as you saw before, when I started to zoom out, you can see like the 4:3 aspect ratio is getting in the way. And look at this. So now my screen is slightly orange after I've zoomed out a lot. Well, why is that? Because there's a grid here. And this grid is slightly orange. Really, it is. And so basically anything like once you start zooming out too much, you'll start to see the grid, which is kind of annoying. You probably don't want to see that. And so that's something I've been trying to trying to hide around the limitations of it. But you can understand that those are limitations to this method as well. But there's some other advantages that I not to mention I think are important. And of course, maybe you can think of some advantages to this method as well. So one of the advantages is that it has a very it has a very specific aesthetic, right? Um, and I want to say like the aesthetic is very futuristic. Is that a fair term? Um, I feel that like this is yeah. Maybe I'll just say future. Right? So I really like how it looks. I really like, when you zoom in and like the color, how it looks. I like how I can like make things bigger. And you get something that is like a manipulable object. And I like being able to manipulate the object in order to bring some emphasis to it. So for example, if I have something that is like a quadrants, um, maybe you've heard about the quality, right? So you can have quality, you can have speed, or you can have cost. You have to like pick two. But of course, when people buy products, they're always looking for all three. And so if I want to take this as an object and I want to move it around, like I now have a a manipulable object that I can control with a couple fingers, even though like the screen that I'm like, let's say I'm using it on a laptop doesn't have that capability. I can bring in some of the touch capability from the iPhone or from the iPad directly into that device. So being able to move things, like eventually I would like to be able to like more dynamically move it. And then being able to resize gives you a lot of capability that I don't think it wasn't possible in the clear board example. Like if you're drawing on a physical board, you want to resize something, tough. You can't do it, right? And the other thing that still see as a major advantage to this approach is erasing. So if you can just with a finger erase and you can erase quickly, it means that I can use this same surface over and over and over again in order to illustrate my point. without having to switch pages or go through some of the logistics of how do I make this work, for that size of a screen. And so, okay, I've erased it. Now I want to draw something else. It's fairly easy to do. Or if I want to draw like a quick arrow and then I want to go, okay, erase, right? And so if it's not a good drawing, then I can undo it fairly easily. And I think that that's important. Okay. So I hope that that made sense. That is a method that I have just started experimenting with, that I found is very powerful because of this ability to bring in the different colors. And the way I see it is more and more educators are starting to rely. Whoops. Huh. Oh yes, because there's like two fingers and three finger gestures. It's so cool on Procreate. So there's always ways that you can bring stuff back in. But as more lecturers and more teachers and more educators start to use live video for instruction, or maybe you are an influencer in the space and you want to be able to annotate on top, I think that this is a really powerful method that doesn't require you to block out your screen. It doesn't look terrible compared to some of the other methods that I've seen for green screening. It has that glow effect, and the glow effect is really important because it kind of creates a. I want to describe it as like a hologram. It's like you're having a hologram right on top of your screen. That's really cool, right? Like that's something we love seeing in the movies. We're kind of used to that type of method. Maybe that's a little bit big. um, so we're used to seeing like diagrams and people drawing stuff on top. A lot of virtual reality, like what are they when you look at a VR system or an augmented reality system, what are they trying to do? That exactly this, right? Like this is closer to the end game of what annotation on top of video I think will look like, and what the like metaverse video and annotation should look like. And speaking of metaverse, there are different approaches to doing this, and I think if you really want to see like different types of methods, I'd encourage you to look at virtual production. Virtual productions, people are doing full on like they've got like a mocap suit, or kind of like the like Vicon tracked suits, and they have a camera out there, and they're doing something very sophisticated, very similar to how the Mandalorian is recorded um, behind a live screen, behind a very large like Unreal screen. I think that people in their own homes are going to start experimenting with that, and I'm interested in virtual um, production, simply because it I feel that it's kind of like a skill. I think a skill that people are going to need long term, because it's like we're still going to be recording stuff on video. We're still going to be learning using video. And so if you have the ability to bring in objects or to create objects on the fly, you're going to be at a huge advantage compared to somebody who can only talk online. Or if you can bring in content, like I can just bring in content very quickly from Clearboard, um, then you're going to have a huge advantage compared to somebody who's like, oh my gosh, how do I do this again? I got to push the button, and I got to, okay, let me share my screen. Do you see my screen now? Like, oh my God. Like, it's a huge interruption to the learning process. And so it needs to be smoother. Now, the way that I've achieved smoothness is by having many machines, right? Like I have one machine that I just use for showing YouTube content. I have one machine that I just use, or one iPad that I just use just for annotation. And so that's a little bit of an extreme method. Eventually, I'm hoping we'll get to a point where all of this stuff is integrated. But in the research field, we often don't care about things like complexity. We often don't care about things like the cost, because we're focused on, well, what should it be? What should the end game be? Like, I cannot imagine how much Clearboard cost. the first time it was made, but it didn't matter, right? It showed a way to the future of what people really wanted. And even to this day, people are still trying to achieve the same type of effect as Clearboard. They want to be able to see the other person. And I'm glad to see, like, there are some commercial companies already that are starting to offer this to educators. I've seen um, John Rippo. I've seen a couple educators that I know that have already started to play with a Clearboard-like system. What it is kind of like a plexiglass. It has like probably some lights in the side, and then they're drawing with some fluorescent pens, similar to what was done in the Clearboard example. And of course, it is very powerful because like you're seeing the annotation, and the annotations are nice and clear, right? They're nice and crisp. You can see like all of the colors are coming out nice and clearly. However, the image of the person is often a bit darker because you're behind that screen. And so being able to get around that, or at least be able to compensate for the loss of light for the person, they have to like project a bunch of lights onto the person. And so ideally, you wouldn't have to do that. Like you would just work with whatever lighting or whatever situation you had, and you would be able to draw, without that limitation. So this particular method, while it's potentially a little bit more complicated today, does give a really nice effect, I think, because you can have the clear colors. I'm going to give you the Canadian spelling of colors. And you can bring that in without the loss, and you still have the clarity, right? And I think that that's really what you want. You want like a really crisp line. You don't want something that is slightly blurry. You don't want a person that is slightly dark. Oh my gosh, there are like so many different factors, right? You don't want any of those losses. And so this is a kind of no compromise type of approach that I think is very powerful. So if you haven't seen this approach before, maybe like I do encourage you, like take a look at some of the early research. Like this is not a new technique, but now it's becoming consumer affordable. And that's what makes me really excited is like, what are the consumer affordable techniques that are being used in order to do this type of annotation? And so for some people that already have an iPad, like really, what are you talking about? You're talking about buying an HDMI capture card, maybe something like the Elgato, and like plugging that in, adding it as a layer on top. That's not a lot of cost, compared to how it's like up your own, setting up your own Clearboard, I think would be way more cost than that. So, and so things are changing, right? Like everybody is using video systems like this these days. They're doing a lot more meetings online. We may go back to doing lectures and doing learning back in person, but I think having this skill, no matter what you do, is very useful because we want to record stuff. And when you're recording stuff, I imagine that you probably don't want to be like turning your back to your audience or to the camera. And so you want a front facing type of approach. And so this is kind of my attempt. I've tried several different ways. I've tried Notability. I've tried a couple different solutions, and this is the best one that I've come up with. And I really, really like love Procreate. I think that this is an amazing tool. It's very powerful. It has really beautiful um, brushes and inks and stuff. And so you can even add like the brushes that I showed you was just like a small fraction of them, right? If I want to add a little bit of glimmer, let's see what that looks like, right? So I can add some like particle effect, onto my screen. That's kind of cool. Um, what else can I do? I can add whoops, nebula. Ooh, it's like a smoke effect. Yay. So like I'm adding a little bit of smoke on there, some digital, like it's static smoke though. So not as cool. But they just give you some example of like what can be seen here. And so there are many different types, like the light pen is only one of them. If you want something that is more crisp, then maybe you want just like an ink pen. And so something like this is going to be more clear, but it's still going to be like semi-transparent. It's not going to have the same effect. So you may want to use a brighter color. What I might recommend is switch to color wheel and just use like a nice bright orange and then make the ink really tiny. Right. So you can have something that is potentially a little bit more clear. Um, I don't know. Like I still like the light pen approach because I think that really, if you're trying to go for that effect, it gives you a better image overall. And so yeah. So I hope that that makes sense. On calligraphy pen, would a calligraphy pen be better? I don't know. Or oh, chalk, right? Oh, so maybe for chalk, I need to just go white, completely. It's not completely white. It has a little bit of yellow in it, so like a yellow chalk. So depending on your style, right? Like it gives you more creative forms of expression, and I think that that's really what we're trying to do. Is we're like think of your own type of ink is a way for you to express yourself. Um, and so we're just giving you new tools for creativity. If chalk is your game, then that's something that you can definitely try. My approach has been to use other things, but find different pens, find ones that kind of match your style. I think that it's a fun way of finding different ways to express yourself by still using like it's your own writing, but the way that you use your pen can really give a different type of feel to it. So I don't know. How does Odeon look? Whoa, cool, weird, but everybody's got a different style, so it's all good. Um, and so yeah, like for me, I think that's pretty much it that I wanted to cover. If you guys have any questions, I would encourage you go and you can just post it directly in the chat. I'm happy to respond live, like anything that you're not clear about. And also, if you are interested in learning a little bit more, then I would encourage you to go and check out the site. So it's aiparenting.live. We have a regular webinar that we're going to be doing focused on virtual productions, ways of improving. So this is just like one of many examples. We don't typically go through all of the details of how things work inside like a short one, like an hour is a short amount of time, to cover all this. And so usually we cover it in more detail, and we cover other aspects like certain core fundamentals that you need to know. So, for example, one of the fundamentals that I talk about is this notion of presence, right? So, you want how do you become more present in front of the screen? And part of it is like you need to adjust the lighting, you need to adjust the sound. Does the lighting like is there enough light? Is it bright enough? And the reason is because digital surfaces, they don't have like digital cameras are not as good as our eyes at seeing other people. And so what normally would be a really clear image, like if you don't have enough light in there, you don't even look like you're really present. It looks like you're really far away. And then the other is sound. A lot of people don't spend enough time working on the quality of their sound, and you can't hear the person. So if you can't hear the person, then they feel like they're really far away from you. And so there's all of these things that we do to distance ourselves in the camera. We don't feel present in the actual camera view itself. And this notion of layers is what I am focused on today, because we need to understand that if we're doing a video production, there are many different layers that we can work with. And understanding that there's going to be some layers which are going to be on top, like in front, there's going to be some layers that are going to be behind, and that's normal. That's kind of what we expect from this. And then that way you treat the surface as not just, oh, I have just one layer that I can manipulate. I have many layers that I can change. And so your control of the different layers is going to determine the quality of the type of live stream that you're going to be able to do. And so that's it. Like, this is what I wanted to cover today, just this topic. And I hope that this was helpful for you. I am really inspired by this. I think, I could play with just these elements. Oh my gosh, water. Oh my gosh, they have a water effect. Get out of town. So like, if I choose this, what's gonna happen? Oh, that's so cool. So I can add like a water type effect on here. Like, yes, please do. So fun, right? So snow, yes, the snow is falling. Yes, so there's so many different effects. I love it. So that's my examples for today. That's all the time that I have for today. I really appreciate you guys joining us. If you want to learn a little bit more about my approach to virtual production, I'm going to be covering a little bit more about that because I feel this is a life skill that everybody needs to learn. I won't be going into like the super high end, like, detailed ways that some people do for virtual production. Like they create like a 3D avatar, because my feeling is that it's not the right approach for most consumers. And the reason for that is it takes a ton of money in order to create a 3D avatar that doesn't run into this like really weird, uncanny valley where things seem less real and they seem creepy. So I think for the time being, like, there's still a lot that we can do with just the human face, and we can augment it, and there's all sorts of fun things that we can do. So that's going to be my focus over the next little while. So if you found this helpful, please go and subscribe, give us a like, write a comment, say like, hey, I found this really helpful today. Thank you for sharing. Then this is something that gives us an indication we're on the right track, and this is something that you want to see more of. And in the meantime, go to aiparenting.live, visit our site, check it out, sign up for the newsletter so that we can let you know when we are going to have our next masterclass on how to improve presence, what are some of the core things that you need to know, and tutorials. Something that we're going to be providing absolutely free, because we want to enable everyone to be able to create this type of level of production. And we're just getting started, experimenting with a bunch of other things that I want to start sharing with you soon, but I will keep you in the loop. Thank you and have a great one. I really appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Thanks. Take care.